Hey everyone, so today we're going to be playing a game into Lexi. This is probably one of the best decks right now during the RTN season. We are choosing to go second. We would like to have tempo with all of our disruption effects, and if the Lexi double arsenals and cards like CNC, you get more value. But Frailty Trap is going to be brought in here. If Talishar will let me bring in the third copy. Alright, there we go. This is just really good if she fires off 3 arrows and it's essentially a 0 for 6. If you ever catch her playing Bolden Shot with just the +1 from Voltaire and use Frailty Trap, her turn will end after that because Bolden Shot will lose go again. We'll bring in the Sinks and we will also bring in Fate Foreseen. We could actually bring in Razor. I'm not too sure if I want to bring it in yet. Let's look through the rest of the deck first. I think we can cut a shred for a Razor here. Just because we're going second, we have more opportunity to try to spike cards over the top and try to prolong our combat chain. Plague Hive is not going in here, and honestly, with Oldhim LLing and CC, this card probably gets cut from the list. Even though it has a lot of uses in a Lexi, it being a no block is a pretty high liability, but more importantly, if the Lexi for some reason is on... If the Lexi is on Codex of Inertia, and you flip into Arsenal, you pretty much just can't win the game after that, which is pretty unfortunate. So it's not really something that you want to have happen to you. Just in case that happens, we just choose not to bring in Plague Hive. We'll try using the new Talishar UI, and you all can let me know in the comments if you prefer to see the Legacy Talishar UI. I like the Legacy Talishar UI just because it's a little bit cleaner to understand in my opinion. All the cards are normally laid out in a way where you can see all of them. There's some, visual things that I find to be a little bit distracting compared to the Legacy. So we have a couple options here. Our opponent just arsenals, passes over to us. So we could, pitch a bite and play a contract and try to hit something. But the only problem is we have a surgical in hand. So we have one option where we can double dagger, play isolate, we can dagger once, paying with 2 contracts and then surgical. But the problem with that is we don't get an arsenal, which is pretty unfortunate. So I think we're just going to have to IP penalty ourselves and just arsenal one of the contracts and just let one of them just sit in hand, unfortunately. It's not what you always want to do, but I think it's fine in this instance. So we're going to Uzuri swap in. We do get a surgical. You could black tech here, but I think it would be a little bit too early to use these possibly, but maybe it's okay going second. I guess we could try going second just because we are able to pressure a little bit more damage. So we banish our Rain Razors off the top. So I feel like I just got incredibly lucky, and that's not always the case in this matchup. So if you're able to banish all of the really good cards, if that makes sense, then you can win this matchup. So like we're going to banish Codex here, and now we've just removed 2 of arguably some of the best cards in Lexi's toolbox besides 3 of a kind. But the problem is we now just incredibly upped our odds of winning the match, but that was purely random, right? Like this Rain Razors could have been, any of those cards in hand, which were, it won't show us the log. It would show you in the Legacy client, but there was a blue headshot, there was a lightning surge and a lightning press. So if we banish any of those cards off the top, it doesn't really matter, but if you can manage to hit one of those better cards, then the deck becomes so much weaker. So that's what I do like about Contract Uzuri into Lexi, and something the red line list can't do is you can't really pressure cards from deck, which you can passively fatigue Lexi because now we're about to banish 3 cards from them. So now their deck size is going to fall down a lot. But see, like we hit 2 codexes. Like I don't think this is like super reasonable, I guess. Like this isn't going to happen all the time. So we have to pay for the Winter's Bite. We're going to pitch a blue so we can actually still use our D-React through the Frostbite, which is pretty good for us. And then we'd have the option of playing the D-React. We can play a Sink Below and then save the Frailty Trap for the Lightning Press, or we can block 3 and then Sink Below and cover all of it up and arsenal the Frailty Trap. And I think I'm more inclined to do that. Just because Frailty Trap isn't going to get a lot of value on this turn. So it would be better in Arsenal. The other potential Arsenal target is Annihilate the Arm, since Tunic is going to be on 3 on the following turn, so we can send, Fleece the Frail, Arsenal, the Annihilate the Armed, and then Tunic and send it on the following turn. But I really like having Frailty Trap in Arsenal. But so that's my only problem is I think this game, it's not over yet, obviously. They have a lot more power cards, but if we are able to close it out, I feel like a large part of it is due to banishing, these 3 massive cards straight out of the deck. And if we banished any arrows there and did nothing else, things like that don't matter a whole lot. All right, so the 3 of a kind here. It is worth noting, however, that they did have a Lightning Press in hand, and now that Lightning Press can't be played, so we are able to do a little bit more on this turn. I think with this many cards, I think we're just going to lose a point of value in Frailty Trap now. We end up blocking 6 to 5. But I think this is going to get more in the long run of this turn. Our turn is going to be sending Leave No Witnesses and trying to Arsenal Death Touch, although we are going to be open to having to block with all these cards. I think it's just better just to be a little bit more flexible that way. But yeah, getting back to this, I think the Uzuri... I mean, we'll look at this game overall to get a better idea, but in my opinion at least, it feels like the Uzuri Lexi matchup is like pretty close to even. It might be slightly advantageous for the Uzuri, but I think it comes with... My assumption is this game will have a little bit of a back and forth, but it's either going to be that my opponent is just always drawing strong tempo cards and pushing lots of damage that I can't reasonably block out, and if I trip up on disruption like that, see my... we kind of shut down their whole turn there, and then we have a relevant on hit, right? Like if our hand was kind of weaker and it was just maybe a contract card or something like that, this returning hand would be pretty weak, and then my opponent would get another 6-card hand to set up again. But because we have a relevant card, we're just able to keep the pressure on. So it's difficult because I think that in either direction, the matchup looks a lot more swingy, which can maybe lead to some, in my opinion, differing opinions on it. If that makes sense at all, because if I win this matchup, it's because I banished all the good power cards. I always had relevant disruption every single turn, and I wasn't being pressured too much on life, either through the Lexi, drawing poor hands, a little bit of RNG, or just not being able to play through my disruption. And then on the Lexi side, if she's able to win, it's normally because she's just always drawing strong hands. I'm not drawing disruption, or I'm taking too much damage to send the disruption. So things like that. And so what ends up happening, in my opinion, is it looks like a blowout on either side, if that makes sense. But we're just trying to be as careful with life total as possible. So many of our cards are primarily just for blocking. We don't have a way to go wide, and so we are just looking for much smaller hands to play off of. So we get left with a larger hand here. So we're going to Spider's Bite into the Death Touch. If the Death Touch hits, we're probably just going to send Frailty. It's because my opponents once again send up a 6-card hand, and then we're going to Arsenal Plunder the Port because it's basically a guaranteed hit. I don't believe there's any cards in the deck that can... Don't believe there's any 2 costs. So that's maybe Battering Bolt if they're using Battering Bolt. So we're probably going to take 4 here, but I'm just going to block. I'm going to block for only 3 to incentivize them using Lightning Press now, because as long as that card's in Arsenal, it's a little bit tricky to play around it, especially if they line it up with a better on hit. And my opponent, I think, is playing around that correctly by not just cashing it in on the first, opportunity they get. The Remorseless is more interesting. I also wish in this client that there was a way for me to tell if this has go again. Oh, it does. Oh, it's right here. Okay, so this does have go again. So they're gonna have one more load here. I think we're gonna block this one. I think our ideal hand here is actually isolating in an Eradicate, or just playing off a Tunic. But regardless, I'll block this for 3. I'm planning on blocking with these 2 cards, but in the off chance that my opponent doesn't present much else afterwards. So this is pretty interesting. I'm actually going to block this for 3 and see if they want to lightning press. If they lightning press, I don't think we lose a whole lot. And that way we get to keep Eradicate here. So we can Tunic for it as well. And I like Eradicate a lot because if they don't block, you pressure a lot of cards from deck. Right, so we just remove 4 cards, which is pretty nice for us. And now we do have a Codex lineup, which is pretty good. The only problem is we have a lot of conflicting cards in hand. But I think we're gonna let the first one... I think we're gonna have to let the first one go through because we can only partially block here. So we can only block for 8. Not playing Rain is pretty interesting here. I'm not entirely sure why. We'll block for 4 and see if they want a Lightning Press, and they do not. I'm interested to see what they're saving the Lightning Press for, actually. It could be for something like a Heat Seeker. I think this would be a pretty good card to hit. It's a little bit unlucky that my opponent was not able to have the resources to also play the Rain Razors, because that would really change this turn, especially since they had Falcon Wing. Rain Razors would be a 0 for 6 in this instance instead of just having to pitch. If it hits, my opponent actually can't use all their cards efficiently, so I'm not super concerned about covering up for a perfect amount. They'll probably Lightning Press it here to clear this card out of Arsenal so that they can Arsenal this card along with the Heat Seeker face up on hit. Okay, they choose not to. Wow, alright, that's a pretty good one. A little bit unfortunate on our side then, because we don't have a very good response to this. We have a lot of life total to work with, which is really good. But we're gonna pop Mask here. And I think we're actually gonna pop a Dagger because I do think that at some point, probably very soon, we're gonna have to block with Flick Knives for value, so we might as well just get our point of damage in early. Okay. These are very good cards to hit. Love hitting the reds. Those would have been cards they would have drawn off of the 3 of a kind. Now we have a pretty good turn considering they don't have an ice card to give us a Frostbite. We're able to have 2 Fate Foreseens, and then we're able to send back a Codex turn, which is pretty good. My opponent plays Codex of Bloodrot. We currently have a Ponder. This comes in for 5. I think we're inclined just to block this for 6. See if they want to press it or not. This has been sitting here for a while. I think there were probably better times where my opponent probably could have cashed it in. This does not have Go again. So it looks like we can just double Fate Foreseen this, which is also nice because we can set up our Codex card. So obviously we don't want to shake down an Arsenal, so we're going to put that on the bottom. Then we have our second Fate Foreseen. And this one's okay. I think this one's just barely good enough that we would like to have a 0 for 4 that has a contract on hit, so I think we'll leave that one on top. Does barely get in. We'll get their double Arsenal once again, but it is pretty good for us because we're going to be able to send back Leave No Witnesses, which is going to pressure a lot from here. So we'll probably take 2 cards. So here's a good question. Do we want to bring back Black Text or do we want to bring back Mask? I think typically if you're behind in the matchup and you're needing to block a lot more and only send 1 contract a turn to keep parity basically, I'm more inclined to bring back Mask, which may be the case here, but something tells me we're going to get a larger hand because my opponent's going to have to partially block on the Leave No Witnesses. So in that case, I do want to bring back Black Text to be a little bit more aggressive. We'll see what my opponent wants to do here. And it is pretty helpful to start keeping track of our opponent's threat density. So I believe all infecting shots are gone. That's pretty big. 2 Codexes are gone. There's a Rain Razors pretty much on the bottom of the deck. I think it's maybe like 3 or 4 cards up. So that's not going to be here for a while, which means we're only dealing with one more Rain Razors and one more 3 of a kind, and one more Codex. So we do get 2 cards from our opponent here. We're going to take our Blood Rot. We're still above 30. Really good. This is also a very solid hand to draw here, in my opinion. They are able to premeditate, though. So I think we're just going to block this for 6. That touch for 6 is pretty strong, so I think this is where we're going to cash in our... Oh, it's only for 5. Because of the Frailty token. Okay. So that's actually insanely good for us because we can just 1 card block this and not have to give up Flick Knives just yet. This is also really good because now we can set up 2 Frailty traps in a row where we can Arsenal one, play it, and then do a full turn cycle and Arsenal the other one. So we'll leave that on top. Also because, in my opinion, I don't think my opponent's pitch stack right now is super liable to Frailty trap, besides I guess we can play around that Rain Razors. But also because of the contracts, my opponent's going to get to their second cycle a lot faster than whatever we're going to pitch stack here. So we're going to cash in our Frailty trap here. Frailty is also really good for us here because if they do, yeah, they're kind of incentivized to just not attack with it. So pitch these 2. Oh wait, no we won't. So we're actually going to cash in our Tunic. We're going to try to set up a double Plunder the Poor turn to try to reback by most of our equipment. So we'll send Plunder the Poor. There's a high likelihood that it hits. And then we'll probably Flick Knives in. Although I don't actually think that matters a whole lot. I don't think my opponent's going to block regardless. Oh, they do actually. Okay. I think that's fine. Ripping 2 cards for a contract that doesn't really have a relevant on-hit's very good for us. Now my opponent's down to 20 cards, we've managed to banish 11, so things like that really do add up over time. We'll see my opponent gets a Codex. If they get something like a Bolden Shot, it's the last Rain Razors in their hand, is how we read that. If they get Falcon Wing, they're just trying to have a more go wide turn, but I think it's just not going to be enough. Okay, so they just want to send the Endless. So that tells me that they're just going to snaps this. The question is whether or not we block for 6. If we block for 6, we play around Rain Razors, which is probably the correct decision to make here. As much as I want to use Frailty Trap on this turn, I don't think it matters too much. And I'm more concerned about making sure that the Endless Arrows stay engraved. So we have a Bolden Shot. The funny thing is that if we Frailty Trap this, they lose their whole turn. So I believe we're just going to go ahead and do that. We leave our opponent with Codex, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we do have Leave No Witnesses to actually pressure that card. And since they weren't able to play Codex, we can actually send the Bite. But what we're going to do instead is we're going to play Leave No Witnesses. We're going to have our own Codex in Arsenal. But if they don't block this, we're gonna black tech it, codex, force them to re-arsenal, and then play another Leave No Witnesses. And we'll also actually use the flick bite here, or the flick knife, so the returning card is a lot worse. And then we're just gonna rebuy it back in. And because we use flick knives, when they do go to block for whatever card they put in Arsenal, if they do want to block for the card they put in Arsenal, we're going to make it a lot more difficult. They're gonna have to block with 2 cards from hand. They can't just block with a 3 block and Tunic, so we take away most of their options. Now they're down to only 16 cards in deck. My opponent decides to scoop it up. So this is kind of what I meant, where this matchup feels very one-sided, but it feels like a 50-50. So my opponent never really got a chance to play the game, but it's only because I pretty much, most of the time, had really relevant on-hits, besides I think a couple turns where I was just able to full block and then I had contracts available. And so because of that, it is difficult, right? There were 3 huge cards we never had to play against. We had to play against 2 more codexes, and we had to play against 1 more Rain Razors. That can really change the tempo of the game, and we just never had to do that because we were able to banish them. So if you're on Redline Uzuri, I think it's even more interesting because you can't really remove cards from your opponent's deck the same way that Contract Uzuri can. So for the most part, you're going to play against most cards in your opponent's deck at some point. So if we actually go to stats, I'd be interested to see what overall Talishar results are. This isn't as helpful as some of the larger tournament data, but regardless, we can just look at this month. So when people are more in tune with how to play the decks, you know, we see Lexi with a 58% win rate, and let's find Uzuri. So Uzuri is a 49-51 matchup according to Talishar. So that's actually not too far off from how I feel about it. I think maybe with some better... Interesting. Okay. Might be a little... I'm not exactly sure what this means, but it says 50% here, but it says 49% here. Not really sure, but regardless. So that kind of does reaffirm a little bit. I mean, how many matches is this? 2,000 matches. That's a lot. People are pretty skilled on Talishar nowadays. I think when it first came out, I think player overall skill was a little bit lower, but you know, people on Talishar do know how to play Lexi fairly well. Uzuri is a little bit more difficult to play, which is maybe why I would say maybe it's a little bit more favored for Lexi, but not by a whole lot. But what you can see here is that it's actually not that of a stomp kind of matchup. I mean, it's her worst matchup besides the mirror by 1%. I guess Azalea is also 49%. I mean, Lexi just has an incredible win rate spread right now. But what I mean is that there are 2 sides to this matchup. Either the Lexi, you know, gets to go second, just draws really hot, is not really stopped by any disruption, or plays in a way that the disruption doesn't matter a whole lot. So if she's only like single arsenaling cards, arsenal disruption effects don't matter as much. So, you know, cards like Leave No Witness, like, she can let those hit and not feel like she has to take a massive pivot to do it. Or maybe you play the Leave No Witness when she has 3 of a kind, and so she's able just to block 6. Or, you know, at the very minimum block 4 with 2/2 blocks and just completely pivot off of 3-0 and just keep the chain going, basically. So because of that, I don't actually think this matchup is super favored, but what ends up happening is that it looks like a stomp in either way. So this was a game where I drew disruption basically every single hand. I always had high damage output, and I never really let damage leak through just because I was drawing D-reacts at the appropriate time. I was drawing frailty traps at the appropriate time. I always, pretty much most of the time, had a disruptive effect in my hand. And the Lexi lost her power cards off of the banish effects and was just never able to really play the game. So in my opinion, that's like the 55%. is like your deck functions well, but her 45% is her deck functions well, and it just completely rolls you over. It's not like a complete blowout, but if she's able to just chain together, you know, 15, 20 damage turns every single hand, and you're just returning with a 0 for 4 contract, trying to like sneak it up to 5 value by like breaking mask or whatever, it's just not enough and you just get blown out super quickly, and then this life total probably gets swapped. So things like that do matter, and it's pretty much my understanding of the matchup. So hopefully this was helpful to learn how to play into Lexi a little bit. I think I played pretty efficiently, so hopefully it's helpful to understand the gameplay. But until next time, thank you for watching.